Now we're going to look at your part 2 of your final projects for your column newspaper ad. Again, this one is tricky, somewhat on purpose. Like I said, it's the old squeezing 10 pounds of garbage in a 5-pound bag and making it look good. So far, I like what I see from everybody. There's definitely some tweaks. This one I don't necessarily like to show examples of student work, um, kind of in general, just so it like, not that I want you to struggle, but it sort of, I don't know, kind of forces you to find creative solutions, right? That's my idea anyway. Okay, so let's get right into it. Here's Elizabeth's. Um, so looking at this, the shape size rather is decent, correct, obviously. Couple of tweaks here that I would do, obviously. There does seem to be overset text here for some, oh yeah, there is. So you have to be careful, right? So you're missing some text here, all right? So sometimes with Illustrator, I find it, I don't know, there's a lot of personal preferences. I find it easier to just kind of type rather than create this area type in Illustrator for like a headline. Again, so you kind of don't miss that missing text there, right? Um, I don't mind this format. Um, so for like this section, I think the idea of um, having a text box works well for this part. I see what you're doing. You're kind of like trying to format this square area to fit within this space. Good idea. What I might do, honestly, is switch sort of the sizing of these two. I might make this a little bit smaller. What you can honestly do is grab this eyedropper and it'll magically copy the text. Um, Generally, too, what I would do, this is sort of personal preference, but in general, for smaller ads like this, um, we would turn hyphenation off. Um, I think eyeglasses is already hyphenated, but so that it doesn't automatically um, hyphenate. I always forget what that is under paragraph, maybe. Yep, hyphenate, I would turn off. There you go. So now you can see eyeglasses is one word. I find it just kind of gives you, it reformats a little bit, but it just gives you a little bit more sort of, I don't know, space to play with. But yeah, I would watch your returns. And what you can do is kind of, this goes for everybody too, but what you can kind of do is break up some of this, even if you wanted to keep this a little bit bigger, um, something like that. And then you could have a return there and even put this, center that, um, and have a return there. But you can kind of see where I'm going with this, right? So kind of this big block is tricky to deal with and kind of like on purpose. Um, but generally, not to say that it's not important, but generally sort of not as important. Um, so that kind of gives you a little bit of room to maybe play with your headline. Um, and you can like format this a bit. Again, we talked about in class a bit about how some people in the past have um, like treated that as two not separate things, but you can kind of format a little bit so you can have more of like a headline-ish kind of there, and then sort of the subhead. Um, and then, like I said, I would potentially switch those two sizes, and you can get into, oh, there's my dog again. Um, you can kind of make this a little bit bigger, obviously format it a little bit better than I'm doing now. This is just sort of a rough, just to sort of give you a general idea. Um, I might, well, that's way too big. Um, I might play around with your line spacing as well. Um, Here, maybe not 24, but give yourself, you can kind of give yourself some room to breathe there. So that kind of frees up this area there. Um, to make sort of these sub headlines, if you wanted to kind of treat these as sub headlines, you know what I mean? Obviously, you could do it a little bit cleaner than that, but you can kind of see even just using this as all the same font, but even using like different sizes of the font can kind of give you a little bit of kind of creative freedom, or just, okay, there we go. Or just kind of like not freeze up space, that's not where I was going. Like it kind of allows a different look without changing the font, without having too many fonts in there. And even if you wanted to, go just black here instead of italics, and on this line, even just going black rather than using italics, or even choosing a different weight. This also kind of frees up a little bit of space to make this a little bit bigger. The one thing I would definitely look out for is to make sure this looks slightly distorted. It might not be, but I would double check it. Like the Lens Crafters logo looks a little bit squished maybe. And then okay, that could be 10 point. What I might do is, just go to a light, a light font there. The legal doesn't need to be very big, and you can kind of tuck that in a corner, but that kind of frees up space here if you kind of wanted to put the logos down across the bottom-ish. And then that gives you some more room to play around here, even if you wanted to have the Help the World, Save, See This Halloween, separate that totally. But that sort of gives you this sort of more square-ish space to play around with. But don't be afraid to play around with the hierarchy, the visual hierarchy, right? Like the important, headline. Not that this information isn't important, but maybe not as important as, the contact. Basically, we have the site night, we have the logos, we have the headline, and then we have the contact, and then kind of all the other stuff is not that it's not important, but not as important, but just some various some simple formatting to be able to play around with these, right? Okay. And some of these are JPEGs, so I need to go to preview. So this is, let's go to Jeremy's here. So again, we kind of have a decent start. You're kind of separating, separating your information fairly well. I would say try not to stretch your texts. Like this is a little bit squished horizontally, so it looks, kind of long vertically. But you're kind of on the right track of like sort of separating this text, like as you look at this quickly, give the get to site, sitenet.org, and the phone number, pops out pretty well. I would definitely rearrange these logos. You could make these a bit smaller, and kind of maybe even have them along this bottom part, and then even have the site night logo, give or take, here-ish. If you wanted to do this kind of effect, I might do that just on the trick or treat. Again, maybe try to separate these two. The for a cause part, you could have the trick or treat with that arch effect, and then for a cause on site night, and then to have this a little bit more normal, and then kind of like rearrange this block of text to kind of maybe separate for the information, and then have this block kind of separate, maybe go center instead of left justified. And then you could kind of have a different font treatment along the bottom. But yeah, I mean, definitely rearranging the logos, having them sort of across the bottom, giving you space to make the site night logo a little bit bigger, and then kind of swapping treatment for the sort of sub headline and the headline. I think could work really well. All right, going to Sanaa. Let's go back to Illustrator. So we have two here. I'm missing the font. That's okay. We can worry about that later. But I like how you have this broken up. I like how you sort of have the options for the sort of left or right, depending. I think kind of like maybe a mix of both of these might work well for you. I'm trying to decide sort of like visually which I like better. Again, I might sort of like mix elements. So whether you decide to go left or right justified, um, I think either one could work. I kind of like, I kind of go back and forth as I look at this, right? Like I like how you broke up this headline, but I kind of like how you have to help the world see this Halloween at the bottom. Um, I also don't mind instead of having the information at the bottom. So first, decide if you're going to go left or right, essentially justified. Um, I'm leaning towards like this format, maybe a mix of these two formats. So you could even do, you know, have your headline, treated somewhat in a similar way. Um, you could open up this a little bit. Um, I would bring down, it might mess things up a little bit visually, but I might bring that down, just kind of like tuck it in a corner. Um, and then maybe make these a little bit bigger. You could even put this on the next line. So you could have this line be a little bit more bold and then that line be less bold. Um, and then I might center justify this text in here. Um, yeah, and then like this would sort of help you stylize this a little bit so you don't have all this like empty space, right? So even if you went a little bit smaller with this, oh, that's not what I want to do. Sorry, I want to do that. So even if you went a bit smaller but longer with this rectangle, and then you could kind of fit all this information. I don't know if you have, nope, that's fine. And then you could kind of fit this information within here, and then kind of make your, you have guides in there. It's all right. And then that would free you up to kind of make this maybe a little bit bigger. Oh, whoops, I'm still on my, there we go. So kind of, make that a little bit bigger, and then you kind of have that for the information, and then kind of have that, and then you could even have that in the corner, and then you could have your three logos essentially. Again, this is like sort of quick and more, whatever. Um, something to the idea of that, obviously a little bit cleaner than that, but you know what I mean. So like shorten the width of this space, lengthen the height, and then you could format the text within this space and then have your collection kit info. I would go bolder with definitely with the website and the contact, maybe a little bit bigger if you can get away with it. Um, but yeah, definitely making the logo a little bit bigger, and then you have plenty of room for your headline to maybe even make that a little bit bigger depending on the font that you use. And again, you could do that if you wanted to do that with it, right justified. You're basically just swapping everything, not taking out your background. You're basically just kind of like swapping everything. However you decide to do it, I think it would work. I think it would work either way. So depending on how you want to do it, but that's kind of how I would attack this one. But yeah, I think overall it's a good start. All right, then going to Alexis. We're back to JPEGs. All right. Oh, that's not what I want to do. Like the Illustrator shortcut there. All right. I think again we have another really strong start. I think for this one, I think we could just honestly the arrangement is pretty decent. I think it's a little bit tight in spots, so we could maybe go a little bit smaller, like with the logo. Even if you scaled like by like 10%, it makes a big difference. Just to give it a little bit more room. But I think for you, it might be treating the fonts a little bit differently. I think the way that, there you go. I think the way that I keep scrolling on my mouse. I think the way that you have it broken up works really well. I think it's just kind of, your font sizes and styles are very similar. So it's kind of like a big block of information. So I think visually breaking this up, um, again, kind of if you made this a little bit smaller, and then you could kind of play around with the font here. Um, and then even play around with the font at the top with the trick or treat for a cause, blah, blah, blah. And then that might, making this smaller might free up a little space to bring this up a little bit and give the logos a little bit of breathing room. And then potentially um, sort of swap these, maybe make this bold rather than this bold. But I think honestly, just kind of maybe center justifying your text, making some a little bit smaller, making some a little bit bold or different treatments, or even a couple of different fonts. Having a couple to a few different fonts, 2 or 3 different fonts isn't too bad depending on how you're using them. But sometimes having one font of relative similar size and similar style kind of works as like a big visual block, right? And then people sort of like skip it. But I think as far as setup of this one, I think you're on a really good path. I think for you, it's more just kind of like tweaking the visuals of the text, um, and like slight scaling for this one. But I think you have a really strong start with this. All right. Next up, Laura. And we're in a JPEG again. This gets a little pixelated as I zoom in, but again, super strong start with the layout. As far as visually how things are arranged, I think works really well. I think again for you, almost like Alexis, where it's more of like a scaling and sort of freeing up space kind of thing. I think for these 3 logos, we can go a lot smaller and maybe sort of tuck them into this area here. And probably, you know, use this space for your 3 logos, and then you could potentially make your site night logo a little bit bigger. Um, I like what you've done here. I might try to see if you can make this area like slightly smaller. See if you can get this on sort of one line, or even if you brought, your sides in, if this is area type, doing the hyphenation thing might help too. Um, just so this last line isn't so, not that it's super awkward, but just so it's not so awkward. But I like how they help the world see this Halloween breaks up your information. You could even make this line and put kit here, but make that line a little bit smaller, and then have the contact info even just bold or maybe slightly bigger. And then lastly, my dogs, hey, my dogs are barking. Um, After you move these logos down here and make them a little bit smaller, moving this logo down and potentially making it, as I scroll, making it a little bit bigger. I would honestly swap these sort of treatments. I would have your trick or treat kind of the size of your site night, and then have your for a cause on site night maybe smaller. But rearranging some of that stuff will help sort of free up a little bit of space at the top to do that. But I think the font is a really good choice. You have sort of a more creative distressed font, um, to help break out some of the blocks, and they're bigger, so they're very readable. Um, and then the use of like a more sort of readable, normal, for lack of a better word, font works well. Again, I think the setup here is really good, and I think with just some arranging and a little bit of different font treatments, I think you could have a really strong ad. All right, let's go to Maze is here. All right. Again, very similar. I think the setup of this is really good. Again, you've kind of done a really good job of sort of setting up the logo here, the main logo, and then setting up the 3 smaller logos down at the bottom to really sort of give yourself this more sort of square normal area to work with. I might bring this line really down to the bottom and just kind of tuck it in the corner. And then you can bring that site night logo down a little bit, and then you can kind of bring all of this stuff down a bit. And I might break this up, again, maybe have trick or treat bigger, and then for a cause smaller, maybe break that up, because it is a little bit hard to read with as a full sentence, but the trick or treat it does work. It's not too bad. But as one big line that's a little bit cluttered, I think, again, for you, it's going to be, you have your text broken up really well. I think it's going to be like different font treatments, right? So I think we could go a little bit smaller with this general area. And then again, maybe go a little bit smaller with this line and then bigger, bolder with these two lines. And then maybe have this line be like the same font as this to kind of bookend it. Again, I think you have a really strong start for this. It's really for you. A lot like Alexis, it's more, and Laura, it's more of formatting the text kind of than finding that logo arrangement kind of thing. I think you've done a really good job of giving yourself a sort of more usable space. I think it's just going to be tweaking the text to sort of finish this one off. All right. Up next, Derek. Let's go back to here. Okay, so here, I think, so for this one, we have a lot of unused space, right? I know for some ads, it just depends on what you're doing. So for some ads, if you have a larger space or if you have, you know, something where somebody's gonna have a little bit more reading time, having like a lot of white space works really well. I think in this case, it doesn't necessarily, because if you think about it, these are gonna print, fairly small. Um, so you kind of want to use your space. Whoops, as I just switched. You want to use your space a little bit more effectively, right? Um, so having this, logo center and then not using this space is a little bit tricky. You also don't have, I'm trying to look here. You also don't have the headline in there, so that trick or treat for a cause. Um, this one I think is going to be a lot of formatting. What you can potentially do is take this legal line and either tuck it in the left corner or the right corner. And then honestly, I would drop down these three logos a little bit. And then I like how you have the text broken up. I would move these three logos down and then move this text up and then make that much bigger, bolder. And then not to sort of copy others, but kind of set up, the logo large, either, top right, top left, or in the middle, but basically make it larger and give yourself sort of like this area, give or take, like a more square area, oops, to uh, to set up um, your text, right? So you have room for a headline, and then you kind of have this space for all of your info, and then this space for logo, dropping these three logos down, potentially making them even smaller, but dropping these logos down, bringing the contact logo up, making it definitely bigger. And then you might need to bring this area like in widthwise a little bit. But yeah, I think as far as you have your text broken up in the blocks, I think it's really good. I think it's just kind of arranging to sort of not super tight, but to sort of fill up this white space, just so you don't have such sort of like visually awkward like white spaces there in your ad. All right, and then Nathaniel, I think you have an AI. Go back to Illustrator. There it is. So there, again, I like the way that you have this set up as far as giving yourself sort of more visual blocks to work with. I think for you, it's definitely going to be formatting the text and formatting some logos. Um, I think these could be a lot smaller. We're also not using color. We're just using black and white. So yeah, I might make these a lot smaller. So the for a cause, you can make the site night like slightly bigger. But what I would do is kind of treat these as if they're one thing, if that makes sense. You can have them be two different fonts, but kind of visually have them sort of more unified, right? So if you had, okay, 47, let's try 24. That's a little bit too small, but you kind of get the idea. And then this registration mark doesn't have to be that big either. That can be like 10 point. And then we can play around with when we do that baseline shift or the superscript, you can bump it up. But I think we might even be able to go a little bit bigger there, but you kind of get the general idea. And then that way you can have, this space, trying to get that, there we go. I might separate this one line so it's in a separate box, but then you kind of get the idea. You want to make sure that you have all of the info in there. And then set your returns and your blocking, et cetera, et cetera. If you wanted to do these as like separate blocks, like that totally works. But again, I think yours is going to be sort of like cleaning up the arrangement and the actual fonts that you're using, you know, and kind of making this more of a headline, making sure you also need to make sure that we're not, you know, I would bring this down a little bit just so you're not so close to the edge there. You know, and even like center justifying the collection. Like I like how you have that separated. You could potentially make that even a little bit bigger, or um, at least make these a little bit bigger. You know, maybe not like 18, but again, this is rough, but you get the general idea. And then this will also free up making these three logos slightly bigger. And even if they're, oops, I'm hitting the wrong button. You know, even if they're, you know, kind of across the bottom here, give or take, obviously you can arrange and rearrange. But, you know, make those a little bit bigger. We don't want to forget the sponsors. And then that can definitely be one line across the bottom there. Oops. Like that could be one line. So this, you know, gives you plenty of space, you know, plenty of space to work with. But I think, you know, I think you have a good start. But I think yours is going to be kind of like, you know, playing around with this headline a little bit, maybe even making the logo slightly smaller. You know, not much, but like you could see just a little bit smaller goes a long way and gives you sort of room to work. And then that way you have more of this like kind of space like that. So I think yours is going to be, again, sort of more formatting the text, maybe using different treatments of fonts. But in general, I think this is a really strong start with some minor changes in font treatments. All right. We have Brandon right there. Okay. So this one, I kind of like some of the ideas that you have. So I see what you're doing with, I think we talked about it in class. I see what you're doing with the sort of newspapery look, but this is an ad that's going in the newspaper, so we don't necessarily have to have this. So I would, um, I would get rid of all of this, to be honest. And we don't want to add extra stuff. So like the volume one and the enjoy the festivities, like the client copy is client copy, and we're not changing that or editing it. We're just arranging it, right? So if you wanted to kind of treat this area like a headline, and have your, I can save this, but like if you kind of wanted to have this, you know, sort of idea, let's see, if you wanted to sort of have this idea to go along with the newspaper-ish look. You could even have, um, you know, the Help the World See This Halloween. I might choose a different font there, just so it's a little bit more easily readable. And then you have all of this space basically. Oops, this is groups. That's all right. Make sure I have everything. Oh yeah, you want to make sure that you're grouping your logo. I would go back to the original logo because you're missing a whole bunch of stuff. But you know, you can put your one logo there, and then this way you kind of have all this room here essentially to break up the information, like all of this information, because that's kind of like one big block. And I would kind of get rid of that. Or if you wanted to put that, oops, if you wanted to put this line kind of across the bottom, and then have your, you're missing your AAA logo. But if you wanted to have the logos down generally across the bottom, you know, and have your AAA logo, give or take there. You know, you could even, depending on how you treat this top part, you know, you could have this logo here a little bit bigger, and then you have your all rights reserved, and then you have this space for your logos, and then now you have this nice square space to sort of break up this information in here. But again, we don't want to add copy. We're just editing, not editing, but we're visually treating the copy that they have. Clients get really upset when you edit their copy, even if it's silly. But yeah, if you kind of wanted to keep that sort of newspaper-ish look, you certainly can. But I think, yeah, setting it up sort of in a way like this and giving yourself this room to work with here for all this block, now you can kind of have a sort of more even space to work with. And then I would definitely change the font for this because you can see it's a little bit hard to read. If you think about the example I showed with that the fish restaurant, right? So we don't want to have too small a font that's too kind of like visually delicate because it's very hard to read, right? So you want it, if you're using a smaller font, you want it to be nice and readable, right? These are both about the same size, and you can see like this one is way more readable than this one. Just given the type of font, it's fine to use for a headline, but as far as body copy, you don't want to use something that's has a lot of like whatever you want to call it, filigree to it like that. But overall, a really good start. Right, then we'll go to Corbin. Back to preview. There we go. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then cut off so we can just see. There we go. All right. So not bad at all. I like the sort of use of color without using color, if that makes sense. We're still black and white. It works well. The only thing, and this will depend on the printing, and you guys wouldn't know this. Uh, well, we didn't cover it in class, I should say. It's not that you would know this. But sometimes with printing, sometimes they don't like to use, like if it's a paper or something like that, they don't like to use a lot of overall color like this because sometimes it has a tendency to bleed on the next page. But for the purposes of this assignment, it's totally fine. Yeah, I think you have a really good start here. Your headline works really well. I like the border that you've created. I might go a little bit lighter with your background. Um, I might the 10th annual site night. Um, you might have already tried it, but I might try that whole line in that same font, just so it's not um, so like visually separated, if that makes sense. Um, and then I might, for this font, I might try a little bit more um, of I'm blanking on my words, um, a little bit more of like a classic, I guess, font, because that is a little bit hard to read. Um, and then I like how you have this help the world see this Halloween breaking up this space works really well. Um, again, for your um, legal line, I would use a more regular font like Arial, Helvetica, something like that. Tuck it in the bottom corner there. You can drop these logos down a little bit, even if you wanted to make the AAA and the lines logo a little bit smaller, like maybe 10% smaller. Um, bring those down a bit. Um, bring those down a bit, and then that sort of frees up space. I would go bigger, bolder um, with guy would go bigger, bolder with this spot here, just so it sort of separates. I think for some of the lines, even if you wanted to use this font for this line, now that I'm thinking about it, the 10th annual site night, if there was a bolder version of this, if you can go bigger, bolder, and then more sort of classic with this, and then help the world see, um, and then for more information, a little bit more normal, and then make this a little bit bigger. You just want to, especially for the information, you want to make sure that you're using a font that's very, very easy to read, especially if these are printing relatively small. You want to make sure that especially like a website like SI, like that kind of almost looks like a Z. You want to make sure that there's no mistaking, anything like that legibly, because people are lazy and they'll be like, oh, is that SIZ, SH? And I'm not gonna bother. So anyway, maybe a little bit more traditional, or give it, if you can go a little bit bigger, a little bit more bold. But I think as far as the overall setup, I think it looks great. I think it's just like some different font treatments for this. Um, and honestly, some relatively minor tweaking for that to really bring this home. I think I have to look at the original, but we want to make sure that we're not missing. I don't think we are. I was trying to see if they were missing. No, I don't think we're missing stuff on this one. I keep going back and forth to make sure that we didn't drop any. anything from that original logo. But I would double check the logo, make sure that it's not distorted and that we're not missing elements of the logo. I think it might be a little bit wider, but I would double check the original just to make sure that we're not distorting logos. But again, overall, a really strong start with this one.